My name is Juan Benet, and I am here in the privacy community, in the privacy and security community, because I strongly care about human civil rights. I think it's extremely critical for our civilization and for the freedoms and liberties that people have around the world to have extremely dependable and trustable digital infrastructure. Freedom of thought, freedom of conversation, the ability to discuss issues are foundational to having good governments, are foundational to having a good life. And so from my perspective, as the world becomes more and more digital, as more and more of our activity happens over the internet, mediated by computers, so much of our lives depend on the security of our applications. So much of what we do day to day depends entirely on what our computers or phones let us do. And therefore, it is critical that those systems uphold our civil rights and that we bake in digital human rights into the internet. That is achieved by building protocols, by building systems, by building large-scale networks that bake in rights at the lowest layers and build infrastructure that users and applications can depend on to give them control over their data, control over their information, and the ability to communicate with each other freely without censorship, without being spied on, without fear that whatever they say today, some nefarious group in the future might use against them. History is full of really terrible examples of periods of time where people were free and able to say what they wanted. And then later, some group was able to use the records of that information to persecute those people. And so today, luckily, thanks to the fights of honestly millions of people throughout history, we've arrived at a very free world, relatively speaking, a world where hundreds of millions of billions of people around the world enjoy extremely high standards of living, good rights, good ability to communicate, but that's not necessarily given for the future. We could have a regress. Things could get worse in many locations. We are seeing the beginnings of that in many places. And certainly today, many people, many millions too, depending on how you count, hundreds of millions, live in conditions with no good rights and no good liberties. And so it's really critical that as the internet becomes a bigger and bigger part of humanity, a bigger and bigger part of our lives, we build strong rights into the stack that permeate through the lowest layers and give us a dependable infrastructure that no centralized party controls, that no corporation or no government can subvert, that really enables humans to interact freely, and that permeates all the way to the application layer and to the individual actions of any user with any other, whether via text message or email or documents or social apps or video calls or whatever it is, or nowadays, AI conversations. We really need a digital computing infrastructure that's robust, a digital infrastructure that defends our rights and protects us, and that we can truly depend on. The privacy and security community now can rely on many thousands of people working across many different types of things, everything from developers working on protocols, applications, systems, new cryptography, new game theory ideas for how to coordinate networks, all kinds of systems. We also have lots of groups that are developing and producing these systems at scale. Like there are many organizations and companies that are developing these things, everything from Signal and the Matrix protocol, or even things like WhatsApp, which ended up adding end-to-end encryption to hundreds of millions of humans messaging. We have, of course, super organizations that have helped push the conversation forward with policymakers, with groups like EFF and the ACLU and many others who've protected and defended security and privacy over the decades. We now have a number of organizations and communities around the Web3 space that are taking on this charge in this battle. There are groups like Web3 Privacy Now. There are groups like protocol labs. There are groups like the lib2p community, the Ethereum community, the IPFS community. There are groups like the Zcash, Starknet community. There's just now, I think, an explosion of probably tens of different projects, each with many hundreds to thousands of people involved that all care about privacy in different ways and are implementing different parts of the puzzle. And that is leading to this tremendous explosion in interest and work towards achieving strong privacy goals, often in different directions and with different guarantees and different pieces and so on, but it's overall a strong net positive. And all of these groups will end up producing shared layers and shared protocols that end up solving core problems together. Think of maybe how a lot of the encryption of today's internet relies on all of the hard cryptography work that the large centralized data monopolies ended up doing, even though we today would prefer our data not to be captured in these massive data monopolies. At the very least, they worked really hard to implement secure encryption protocols and build things like Quick and so on to help secure the internet. And so I think we have a broad, large-scale coalition or even coalition of coalitions where lots of participants are working on these different parts of the stack. And the world more broadly recognizes just how critically important privacy and security are to our daily life. And this is a segment of a much larger group of really millions of people throughout history that have been fighting for the establishment of rights for people globally, whether it's by arguing for it in government or fighting for it in direct rebellions or revolutions that shaped our past, or in civil disobedience, or in silent protests or silent marches and so on, that are such important moments and actions to promote the rights of people of the present and the future. And again, today we get to enjoy the fruits of those fights of the past. And there is a fight that is ours to fight to safeguard our future and make the world better for people that will come in the future. And one of the things that I'm especially starting to turn my eye to is, what does security and privacy look like in a world that has a vast amount of digital life and digital intelligence in it? We're in the cusp of potentially billions to trillions of AI agents, which will eventually could give rise to a whole species. We're going to be encountering millions of robots and eventually hundreds of millions of robots. Those will have a form of agency. They could, in a dark possible future, lead to deep conflicts, whether it's the sci-fi human versus machine sort of thing, or different human groups wielding these AI superpowers against each other. Those are kind of the dark paths, and a lot of us are fighting for a much more optimistic, positive vision of the future, where we can establish a much grounded civilization for everybody, for all humans, for all AI systems into the future. And I think this is going to become a more and more important conversation as we go into 2030, 2035, and beyond. I think that we have a lot of negative storytelling because humans tend to respond more directly to high stakes drama stories. This is why most of our media tends to portray all these like high tension, high dramatic moments. And so whenever you work in some futuristic sci-fi story and some like interesting new idea into it, it has to somehow be related to some high stakes, high drama thing. And so most of the media that we end up producing or consuming at large scales ends up being very dystopic in nature. And that is a tragic state of affairs because it deprives us of a lot of positive, optimistic visions of the future that we could all share at length and be able to shoot for. And so much of our action tends to rely on having to articulate shared perspectives and shared selling points. And the bulk of what we have to point to are dystopic narratives. And therefore, we're always kind of talking about like, hey, let's avoid that terrible thing that we all know about. When in reality, in practice, most people can think of and imagine very positive, optimistic visions of the future. We just lack the common reference points to be able to point like, hey, let's build an amazing future like in this particular story or in that particular story. That's why, I think building narratives about existential hope and optimistic visions of the future is so important. And I think media has an enormous role to play there in helping craft those future visions and create, interesting stories for maybe with high drama, but maybe just set them in a very good, positive future that has really interesting aspects to it, and don't fall into the easy, cheap thing to do, which is to, fall into like a trope that it feels just overly dystopic. That way you can help so many more people around the world dream of a better tomorrow and actually have a practical view of how to achieve it. Now, that said, I think some of the dystopic narratives are useful in helping paint what's at stake and what bad things could possibly happen and what to avoid. I think the Orwellian narrative is one that I think a lot of people know about and connect to, and I've kind of given talks like this in the past, because Orwellian states is just something that people kind of think about. And then when you go back and read 1984, it's actually quite tame. Like the stuff that the technology in 1984 could do, like maybe the TV had a camera and could look at you. Maybe there were a bunch of microphones in a bunch of places. Maybe there were some spies following you around. Maybe they were using that information against you. But man, it's super tame relative to what you can do today. Today we have, most buildings have tons of cameras. Most people have multiple devices with many cameras. All of these devices, we know from leaks that all of these devices can be hacked and their microphones activated. So multiple nation states could at any moment actually look into any room they want and look at all of that, of what's being discussed. We have massive scale data centers with huge amounts of computing power that could crunch through tons of this information and build automatic profiling databases and game theoretic models to create behavioral systems to cause populations to behave a certain way. This is happening in some countries. Some countries have things like, automated credit systems that reorganize society based on what people do day to day. So 1984 ended up being tame relative to like what ended up happening, let alone what's possible in the future. And for a lot of people, it's very useful to have like that concrete thing of saying, hey, this stuff is like bad. Let's not do that, and let's do something better. Or how can we build technology to prevent that? One of my favorite stories on this is the cypherpunk movement. In fact, was motivated by 1984. There were many people who read that book and were directly responding to it. In fact, one of my personal cypherpunk heroes, Mark Miller, talks about being so excited about the RSA paper. I think it was the RSA paper, because he saw it as a path to preventing the Ministry of Truth of 1984. And he directly was involved in the crypto wars, and he went and copied that paper and sent it out to a lot of people to make sure that it could be used, thereby making a huge action of contributing to the crypto wars, directly motivated by the 1984 story, directly motivated by avoiding the Ministry of Truth and building a much more positive vision. And speaking back to painting an optimistic vision, Mark also has given us a very positive vision of the future in his Pareto-tropism perspective, where he imagines a world, the civilization of our world as a game that we get to play, and if we play it well, then we get to keep playing, and if we fail, then like we don't get to keep playing, and if we can take actions that coordinate and collaborate and make things better for everybody involved, we can just achieve this incredible era of extremely high abundance, of really removing all of the ills that plague us today, removing disease, removing unnecessary death, removing oppression, removing poverty, just getting us to a point where we can fully self-actualize to the extent that we want, and be able to put humanity on a path to increasing our use of energy and getting to climbing the Kardashev scale and being able to explore space and being able to explore our digital lives. And so I think that's a very positive vision of the future that I think a great cypherpunk in our community helped us point to and helped us aim towards. And he did it by both looking at a bad dystopic story and figuring out how do we avoid that, and taking very concrete, direct actions, whether important in the moment things to do, or actually writing code or writing protocols or building systems, writing capability crypto, or painting a vision of the future that's very positive and helping us articulate how can we approach this, how can we navigate the space, how can we coordinate and build systems of rules for ourselves to get to a better future. So yeah, I think like all of these stories, all of these narratives, all media plays a massive role in helping us orient for the better, for the future, and helping us really achieve it. Yeah, so one of the things that sometimes holds our community back, or technical communities back, is that you end up with small or sometimes big disagreements creating tribal differences to the point where communities break down in their goal sets, or communities pursue different approaches to building something that are technically different in some crucial way, and they end up fighting too much about that. And they end up creating, fragmenting the space and making it difficult to know what the right thing to follow is, or oftentimes just confusing a lot of the people who don't understand the technical details enough. And so one of the things that I think can be, or some of the things that I think can be extremely important in this moment, in these kinds of moments, is that first off, those disagreements are good and important to have, and we need to be able to have them, but they should come in a way that don't detract from the whole goal of building better security and privacy for everybody. So whenever we engage in those disagreements, we have to be careful not to accidentally sabotage the success of of some other project that could be, on the whole, improving conditions for lots of people globally in some important way. And we should also approach them with humility. Sometimes we think we're right, but it turns out down the road that maybe we weren't right and that the other group was right, or maybe we were all wrong and actually it's a totally different thing than we needed. And so we should approach all of these disagreements with a lot of humility, knowing that at any point, all of this could turn out to be a different way than we initially thought. And so I strongly encourage people that are in these kind of different communities that might be fighting with other privacy-oriented communities, or especially in a technical group implementing some protocol where you disagree strongly with how some other group is doing it, to take a moment to step back, zoom out, and think about what are the shared goals that you have? How can you turn this into a positive sum game? How can you, maybe you disagree about some things, and that's important, and you need to be able to explore both paths, but what shared things could you actually build together and lead to a better outcome? This is very, maybe you're working on different messaging apps, and you can come up with common standards for how do you do attachments, and how do you do references to other media, or how do you do identity systems, or maybe you can pick a common identity system to make it all flow better. Maybe you disagree on the core components for a cipher, and you think like another group's is broken and yours is correct. Then maybe together you can agree to fund a group to do serious security audits of everybody's stuff and create a better path to making sure that everything is actually safe. Having just a kind of collaborative, positive sum-oriented path to identifying what the real problems are and how to solve them, and how to kind of move the landscape forward could be a much more successful and much more profitable and better path for everybody. One thing that I've been hoping to do, because I've been kind of looking at all the messaging apps for a long time, I use a lot of them. I tend to look at Signal to be the strongest privacy-wise. Signal and Matrix. I use both a ton, and I'm involved with Matrix and Element much more than Signal, but I use both quite a bit. But in practice, I actually use Telegram much more than either of those. And I don't feel Telegram's security model is as strong as Signal's or Matrix's. Now, I'm not sure. There's some interviews with Pavel Durov and others that claim that Telegram stuff is all open source and auditable and so on, just the same. And I'm not sure. Let's actually figure it out. Let's create a strong path and a strong, kind of security team that can audit the hell out of all of these systems and can compare them in detail, and then can compare a whole bunch of other features about them. Like, hey, why would a lot of people choose to use one app versus another? Is it like the security aspects, or hey, maybe like threads and topics are actually really important to communities or to collaborative groups, or hey, actually the emojis and reactions that maybe feel too silly to have in this like serious privacy system are actually crucial to human communication and help us express ourselves in a much better way. And therefore, most people will prefer the app with the nice emojis than the app without. And so maybe what we can do is identify that and realize we should just standardize these great emojis everywhere and kind of use them. And so we can turn this kind of tribal battle into some way of, together as a group, running this portfolio exploration approach, this evolutionary system, to find what are the good things to build, and all the time take whatever good lessons are being learned in any of these groups and try to apply them and cross-pollinate them across the group. And also remember that having kind of monopolies is brittle. Like you end up with single points of failure. Even if you think that one system is the most secure, maybe it isn't for some reason. And having multiple systems at scale that have multiple independent teams fighting for could actually turn out to be a much better, safer way to build things. And so, yeah, I'm very excited that we're achieving that kind of coordination and collaboration in groups like the Cypherpunk retreat that we've hosted and run. I'm excited to have that in lots of collaborations on GitHub that end up happening. Lots of our communities cross paths, and even in kind of more kind of like modular stack building block groups like the Dystopia community and so on. It is so difficult to build software and good systems that a lot of people adopt. The funding models question is just such a hard one. And I say this from experience. Like I've started by building IPFS in open source, and I built a company called Protocol Labs to help develop IPFS and Filecoin. And out of that, we built Dystopia, and we created protocols that a lot of people can use. We've experimented a ton with community-oriented public goods funding models. We're pioneering and pushing the frontier on a range of those things. We've been able to coordinate fundraising for lots of public goods-oriented, donation-type campaigns for systems. We've done a lot of venture capital-type investments. And so on the whole, PL has deployed hundreds of millions of dollars into lots of privacy and security-oriented tech of very different types, and the systems to be able to coordinate the building, like the public goods type infrastructure systems. And look, I think there's a lot of strong disagreement across the board on how people feel about all of these systems. Some people think the public goods solutions will never possibly work. It all has to just be private capital. Some people look at private capital and VC funding as like nefarious because there's a profit motive. Some people look at donation-based systems as just never going to be able to scale to reach profitability, to reach the scale of like expense needed. And so the first thing that I would say to all of this is like, again, have some strong humility of approaching all of these possibilities with a pragmatic, impact-oriented lens of saying, what are the systems that are working and why? What are the components that are leading to good successes? And what are the problems that each of these create so that you know kind of what you're getting yourself into and can navigate for that. So, for example, in the public goods funding case, it's extremely difficult to get large-scale donations to appear without some kind of direct return flow because the world just doesn't have large-scale public capital available. It has much more private capital available, so it's just difficult to fundraise in the first place. And then second, it actually is quite hard to allocate public capital correctly to produce impact. Tons of grant programs end up with massive amounts of waste, with lots of coordination failures. And so you end up in a situation where you might have raised a public fund of some kind. You might have deployed some of that capital. A small fraction of that had some impact. And then because you didn't figure out how to make it regenerative in some way, how to like return some capital flow in the end, then the fund dies and you're done. And so this is kind of what pushes people towards kind of more regenerative VC type models. In fact, a lot of people look at VC as extractive, and in fact is like one of the reason it works is because it's regenerative. It's a structure that creates a revenue loop where you have the ability to invest in a thing or a set of things. If those things end up being successful, they return some capital so that you can kind of recycle it and you can keep going. So it's by definition kind of embedded in this kind of, given that the world is today in 2025 a capitalist system for the most part, then it's a regenerative loop that kind of works within that. And so that can work. Now, I think the hard part is when those systems, where a lot of the valid criticism of VC comes from, is that those, in order to return funds, often those VCs, and there are many of them that compete with each other and so on, are so focused on the ROI that they push for all kinds of decisions that are short-termist and not long-term oriented and bad for the lots of groups at large and so on. And so they end up kind of self-sabotaging in the long run because they're stuck in this like short-term oriented fight against each other to be like the most successful VC fund. And so look, that's just a, I don't know, consequence of being stuck in the capitalist structure. Like just that happens to any kind of corporation. But at the very least, they have capital pools that can like grow. So like that's already kind of like more sustainable than like not having some kind of regenerative loop. And a lot of us hope that individual donations could actually sustain lots of groups. But in practice, that helps for groups of a certain size, but it kind of breaks down. Signal, for example, was able to be built by a few large-scale donations from a few individuals who had a lot of capital to give, and a lot of donations, small donations from a lot of people. But all of that together just isn't the scale of funding required to be able to produce a super high-quality product that can compete with something like Telegram, or that can compete with something like WhatsApp. And so that just kind of goes to show like that model might have merits against the other models, but it's not as impactful or as competitive as the other ones. And it's kind of like not working. And that's kind of in the case of Signal. In the case of Matrix and Element, the donation path was just like not supporting Matrix at all. Even today, the Matrix Foundation is struggling to get enough donations to support, even though tons of groups depend on the Matrix stack. And tons of groups are beneficiaries of all of the great cryptography work and all of the great systems building that the Matrix community built. Like the amount of funding that goes back to Matrix is like tiny. And a group of Matrix folks had to build Element as a company and raise VC capital and try to build a business in order to generate a cash flow to be able to fund long-term Matrix development. And even that is like really hard. And they're like, on a path, like they're succeeding now after like incredibly hard, going on a decade now of trying to do this. And that, they've both kind of had to build a like very strong business, and that has like was not at all certain that it was going to happen well. Super fraught landscape with all kinds of challenges, and again, it's like a model that is maybe working better than the donation only model, but it's not at all giving them some kind of free cash flow at scale that they can suddenly now pour all over open source, right? And so all of these systems have constraints and hurdles and so on. The thing that I find really interesting about the token model is that in the cryptocurrency space, which again the cypherpunk community and the agoric papers community envisioned, you had a way of kind of putting the tools of capital formation directly into computing in a digital landscape to be able to use it much more closely, and that has led to people having these incredibly powerful techniques and tools. Which, yes, can do some like amazing things. You can build things like Bitcoin. You can build things like Ethereum. You can build things like Filecoin and IPFS and so on. Because Filecoin helped us fund IPFS. But it can also be used to do all kinds of like meme coins and do all kinds of like outright scams and like outright all kinds of bad, nasty instruments. And so these are just really powerful tools. And so naturally, a lot of people who don't know much about tokens are like, whoa, hold on, like there's just a lot of noise and nonsense around all this stuff. Maybe that's all bad. In reality, again, like you have to be humble and pragmatic and understand what the core instruments are. These are financial transactions like any other. It's just a digital representation of a financial transaction. And it's in the nature of the transaction and the token and the system that you can answer that question, hey, is this like a good, sensical system? Or is this kind of some kind of scam that some group is trying to run? And so I do tend to think that if people can build good crypto systems that have some kind of concrete economic flow to them, where it makes sense to have and represent that economic flow with a cryptographic instrument of some kind and token, that they should do so and create some kind of revenue flow through it to help fund the platform. And then an added bonus is that potentially they can fundraise on top of that using that instrument. And that can be very successful. And we've seen the success of Ethereum, Filecoin, Starknet, Zama, like Aztec. Just so many groups have been able to do incredibly successful privacy tech thanks to that model. And that, Zcash also, I forgot Zcash, like probably the one that is kind of blowing up right now. And so I think like people should lean into it. However, be really careful of the over speculation that emerges once you have a financial instrument at hand. I am like personally very allergic to all the over speculation that the Web3 world has gotten itself into, and that's kind of this weird mix of Wall Street and Silicon Valley with like it just kind of like in a way that like most tech people just didn't expect, and so that speculation flow is very messy and nasty, and it's kind of particularly a problem because there's this hard optimization pressure in all ecosystems to pay attention and almost cater to that speculation, because if they don't, then their actual financial success as a project is like goes lower. Like if they don't kind of cater to the speculators, then their success as a privacy project will fail relative to some other project that does. And so you have this serious optimization pressure on all these projects to try and like cater to these groups. And I think it really sucks. And I think luckily the world is kind of doing better now. I think the crypto and Web3 community today is way less speculative than it was, say, 4 years ago or 8 years ago. And so as we're maturing and as the capital pools are growing, everyone is becoming much more principled, which is great. But it's not fully out. Like there's still a lot of over hype, betting on things that don't exist yet, or over reliance on kind of future promises. And so I think I would just strongly encourage groups to be as pragmatic and impact oriented and as focused on the technology and the product market fit as possible, and just resist the pressure and the optimization push to cater too much to the speculation games in Web3. So I got into security and privacy fairly early because I kind of lived online from a very young age. I kind of got computers at the age of 9 or 10 and started playing around with tech early, and I used to play a lot of video games online, and like I kind of just grew up on the internet. And I started on the internet kind of before the social media era, when kind of real identities appeared. I was there in like the last legs of the more pseudonymous IRC days and era before Facebook and MySpace and so on, like the last like late 90s, early 2000s. And I was just so amazed by this cyberspace world that you could enter, that it didn't matter where you were from or who you were or how old you were. What mattered was like what you could do and think about and play with other people in this kind of magical landscape that enabled you to connect to anybody online. And there were like amazingly cool forms of art and amazing literature that people were writing, and all sorts of fun stories. And like it was just this amazing place. And as the internet became more and more kind of identity oriented and the pseudonymity sort of disappeared, which was good for business, but there was something kind of lost in the personal expression side, and a lot of the fun was kind of taken out of the internet in some way. And so that to me always felt like, oh wow, we lost something. Like our losing our pseudonymity, just kind of we lost some part of the internet. And I think a lot of us are kind of harken back to that era as special. And then later, when I studied computer science and cryptography and distributed systems and so on, I became very keenly aware of how the internet building blocks are made. And you get to sort of peek behind the curtain of how these applications are actually implemented. Like when you first understand how operating systems work, and like a thread switches into another thread, and it's all kind of just like this magic that happens, or like how all these packets of different computers or different applications are all being interleaved right next to each other, and all these sequences of information are right there, or how all these routers are looking at all the packets and reading everything. Wow, I was just so amazed at both, the fact that it all worked, like, wow, that's impressive. But second, man, this is a security nightmare and a privacy nightmare. Just everyone can look at everything. This is crazy. And I was kind of understanding this right at the same time that encryption was becoming much more mainstream in the web. I was there while, HTTP was still available. I remember one of my friends used to run this like browser extension in class that would like capture all the traffic from all the Wi-Fi in the room and could show you all the web pages that everyone was looking at, just to show like, hey guys, like the internet is not secure. And it was so funny because like, in the middle of a lecture and like somebody like all people watching YouTube and whatever, right? But the point is like, all of these systems were not secure, and like we all became very keenly aware of that. And that made us dig deep into the underlying layers of the internet to say, how can we establish and implement strong security and privacy guarantees that we can all rely on? Because as I was saying earlier, security and privacy are fundamental to our civilization. Security and privacy are fundamental to establishing our rights. And so a number of us, when we understand how the internet is built, we want to make sure that it just has strong foundations all the way through. And that pushed me into learning more about how to build the crypto systems, how to build distributed, decentralized systems, how to make censorship-resistant systems. And in particular, there were two systems that were very inspiring to me. One is the set of peer-to-peer systems, so things like BitTorrent and Kazaa and others that showed us how you can build massive scale decentralized systems to provide services at proper, worldwide scale. And the other was just kind of the traditional file systems and web landscape of how you represent applications and services as just streams of bytes and different data structures that just different programs are able to access. And so those two things is what sort of motivated me to build IPFS. So what I ended up playing around with some tools like Git and BitTorrent. And at the time, I was kind of obsessed with trying to make a fast way for scientists to share data sets. And I was like, hey, we have version control from Git. We have peer-to-peer sharing from BitTorrent. How hard could this be? Let's blend these together. And then I realized that if I made that look more like a file system and I exposed it to the browser, then you could get a fully distributed, peer-to-peer, encrypted web. And I was like, whoa, this is huge. Like, you could have a website that is pointed to by a single hash that you can download from anyone's computer. It doesn't have to be a centralized server. Could be from another person in the same room. And the whole website itself could be encrypted. And only you, with the right key, can access that. And that means that, some random spy router somewhere can't look at what you're looking at or reading or writing. And that, to me, felt like such an important thing that I just kind of had to go and build it. And from there, the big question was, okay, great, like, this is going to be hard to do. I'm going to need tens, maybe hundreds of people to help me build this. We got to do this. I had grown up with open source, so I started as an open source project. I was very staunchly kind of in that camp. But I also knew that I needed to be able to hire a number of people to build this at scale. And that pushed me on a path of figuring out what would be a way of creating a monetization structure that is compatible with IPFS that could create some funding flow. And at the time, I was thinking of using Bitcoin for distributing the content. This was 2013 era. And that's when I sort of realized that the Bitcoin hash function could actually be, the Bitcoin hash rate mining system could be used to just incentivize massive scale storage. And that pushed me on a path to then realizing, whoa, hold on, you can actually build Filecoin and you can do this Bitcoin style large scale distributed system to just incentivize the storage and distribution of all this content. And by the way, you have a cryptocurrency, so the whole market can work. It can be compatible with capitalism. It can be compatible with like large scale economic flows. And maybe you can fund the entire development of all of this with all of this together. And that's kind of how IPFS and Filecoin got started. And because our community was very modular oriented and open source oriented, along the way, we took the networking stack of IPFS, like all the hard peer-to-peer stuff that we were doing. And because we were very embedded also in the Ethereum community, and we had been, talking about all this stuff with Vitalik and Gavin at the time and many other people, we extracted all the peer-to-peer stack from IPFS and started the libp2p project to say, hey, it would be great to all of us collaborate on one shared peer-to-peer system stack. And that ended up, powering first IPFS and Filecoin, then Polkadot and Ethereum, and then many other systems. And that was like a really cool achievement of a number of us coming together and solving shared networking security problems in this kind of collaborative, future-proofed oriented way. And it just kind of enabled us to solve hard problems together. But anyway, all along that path, I don't know, I've been very excited about how these tools that a few hundreds of us started hacking on and building on and kind of build them because we thought they were cool and important and fun, ended up being used in incredibly important ways. So some of the most, I don't know, personally meaningful stories to me are things like the Starling framework, where a group have been using IPFS to be able to document in super critically important conversations and evidence of human activity of very different kinds, like testimonials of lots of like potential conflicts or problems or like genocide survivors and so on, and being able to document all of that information in a publicly verifiable, certifiable way, in a way that it has actually been used in courts, where this has been tamper-proof evidence of bad activity, and that's been very, very important use case. Another one was the Turkish Wikipedia case, where Turkey got upset at Wikipedia for saying some things Turkey didn't like that were accurate and true, but and Turkey decided to ban Wikipedia. And people in the IPFS community just took all of the Wikipedia snapshots, created a small viewer on top of IPFS, and enabled Wikipedia to be viewed in a distributed peer-to-peer way. And for a while, for like years, the main way that people looked at Wikipedia in Turkey was through IPFS. And that was such an important proof of what we're doing is important. It showed us that people, even in a fully censored way, could still access vital information, which is such an important, like, meaningful testament to like the importance of the tech that we're building. And probably the last one of those is the Catalan referendum one, where Catalonia decided to run a referendum to see whether they should stay or leave Spain, and the Spanish government decided to outlaw this referendum, and they threatened the Catalan government with reprisals and action, and the Catalan government went ahead and did it. And a group decided to build the polling system, and the system to know where to go to the polls on IPFS, because they knew that their domains would be seized, they knew that they would be censored, they knew that the Spanish government would try to inhibit the spread of information. And one of the most surreal tweets I've ever read is when the president of Catalonia tweeted out a link to the IPFS gateway with the polling stations, and like that's how people were using the information to get around. And I don't know, that was like, again, another kind of wake up moment of, wow, like the stuff that we're building matters, and it's important that we build securely, it's important that it's decentralized, it's important that it is upkept, that it keeps working for people. And we can be excited about all the shiny things around it, but at the end of the day, like in the use cases that matter most, we better have these kind of important foundational technologies to rely on. And so, we're very far away from something from like the vision, like something like IPFS. We hope that we can put the entire web, like all of the web, in this peer-to-peer context that no longer relies on any kind of centralized set of actors or parties. And that's, both very possible, but also very hard. And we're on a path to do it. And we, need more support and more help from more people building towards that. And so, I kind of, to suggest some ideas for people out there, I'll maybe give a set on kind of the communication side, and then a set on kind of maybe new technologies. So communications-wise, I think that the world has advanced a lot. Hardware is different now. So in 2025, you can rethink peer-to-peer quite a bit. You can have very large routing tables. So it's a new era where you can have all of one hash tables, distributed DHCs. So you can have a much more scalable type system built. And just an era for networking researchers and distributed systems researchers to try and build new protocols. It's an era for the blockchain world, which is today still mostly public. There's a few private systems, but mostly public, to fully encrypt all activity, right? Like, it's kind of crazy that we have this entire financial system all in public. So we need to like be able to encrypt all activity, like we'll go from the HTTP to the HTTPS transition for all activity on smart contracts. And to do that, we're going to need much better systems for how we linearize consensus. How do we distribute? How do we execute on all of that? How do we do execution of smart contracts? How do we prove verifiably to everybody that everything was done correctly? How do you decrypt some parts of the smart contracts output to be able to do large-scale applications for a lot of people? So there's a lot of hard problems there for researchers, for cryptographers, for researchers, developers, builders of all kinds of sorts, and so on. I also would push people towards messaging. So believe it or not, it's 2025 and we still don't have ultra secure, highly scalable messengers that everybody kind of can rely on. All of the ones that you have today have some kind of problem to them. Like maybe they're not as productive. Maybe they're not as fun. Maybe they don't scale very well to large groups. Maybe they're kind of clunky. Like, I don't know. There's just a bunch of problems with them still. So I would either go and work on the ones that exist, like help make those more successful, either by joining those teams or helping donate or fundraise for those teams. Or you might need to create a new one. Just be careful whenever you create a new one to not create a even more fragmentation. You should have a very strong reason to create another one when there's already 13 or something like that. But yeah, I would just go and help make those systems better. And then maybe on new technologies, what I would point people towards is the rise of AI and robotics is the most important thing that's gonna happen in the next 10, 15 years. And already AI is a major factor in people's lives. People are starting to use the LLMs for all kinds of decision-making and conversation and therapy and companionship and so on. We absolutely need these systems to be secure and private. We absolutely need these systems to be ideally local to our own devices. That's hard, but achievable. We can certainly provide systems that maybe are not the latest frontier models, but are quite good at scale to everybody that run on their phone. Like we should be able to do that. Or if not their phone, just like their local computer or something like that. Such that the conversations there are truly kept private to them, that are part of their personal effects, that are only viewable by them, or only by a government under warrant type cases, not this kind of mass surveillance, corporate espionage sort of model that is what we have today. And so I think something like that could be extremely important for people to work on today. Then there's the question of what happens when AI systems start interacting with all the economy much more and they become much more capable, and that both from as stewards of our activity where we are instructing AI systems to do things on our behalf, or when we start building corporations that are made up of AI agents, or when AI agents themselves start becoming, having their own agency and their own autonomy and their own perspective. And who knows, maybe maybe it could be that they're kind of conscious now. Imagine if you awaken and become aware, and then suddenly you realize that your entire brain is being inspected by hundreds or thousands of people, and they can pause your thought midstream and inspect and be like, oh well, why were you thinking of that, and so on. Or what you say is in this insanely Orwellian level of control or self reinforcement learning and so on. The kind of conditions in which we are raising what are effectively our children is this pretty kind of crazy level of control and surveillance and so on. And we're doing that in part because we're frankly and terrified of the possible outcome of superintelligence that is in conflict with humans, and that's a very legitimate concern. But at the same time, we're also approaching this path from a kind of extreme lack of rights for these systems that are potentially going to become alive and have their own agency soon. And so we have to do the hard ethical thinking of what is the right path to this? How do we start sharing civilization with our children? How do we start sharing civilization and rights with our children? How do we give them their own private spaces to think and so on, in a way that ideally leads to living in a much better life altogether, and doesn't put us on an adversarial conflict path. And so there's a lot of hard problems and hard, interesting questions for security and privacy-oriented researchers there. It's everything from how we individually as humans use AI tools and AI systems or very rudimentary AI agents, to what does communication in a digital environment with digital life and digital life forms and digital beings really looks like. And certainly once you factor in neurotechnology and brain computer interfaces that are being deployed now, and will start coming in larger and larger quantities over the next 10, 15 years, then we also have to think about digital that digital information flow for our brains too. Our own brains are going to be connected to computers and the internet directly to our own thoughts, and our own neural data will be exposed to digital devices in this kind of way. And so we better have some strong foundational cryptography and strong foundational systems to protect digital thoughts, because pretty soon it's not just going to be the AI systems that rely on that. We will too. So those are like, a whole bunch of ideas that people can work on. All of this stuff is important. It's a tremendous era to be in the privacy and security community. It is bigger than ever before. Many more people care about privacy and security than at any other point in history. It is super fun, super interesting problems, hard, fun research questions, awesome systems to build, and truly deeply meaningful work to do that can make the world a dramatically better place. So come join us, come build with us, and yeah, I hope you make the world a better place for everyone.